Hello everyone, welcome to Risk Roundup. There is a vicious power struggle raging on in the cyberspace. This new cyber battleground is full of unknowns, including major players, minor players, rules of war, and reasons for war. In these cyber battlefields, the war casualties have been quietly piling up. It seems every nation, its government, industries, organizations, and academia, in short referred to as NGIOA, has been hit and is at risk of being hit. No one is being spared, including common citizens. This cyber battleground brings each NGIOA, the good, the bad, and the unknown. With the world getting immersed in rapid advances in artificial intelligence, information and communication technology, and cyberspace technology, the activities in cyberspace have become inseparable from activities in geospace and space. The blurring boundaries of cyberspace with geospace and space has pushed each nation to a significant decision point today, as they must continue to defend their current systems and networks in the geospace and space while simultaneously struggle to get out in front of the challengers and competitors in the cyberspace. As computer code, connected computers, and internet fundamentally transforms warfare, the new reality of cyber war is causing panic across nations. So the question is, how can any nation contain the threats posed by artificial intelligence, computer code, connected computers, information and communication technology, and internet? To discuss this further, I'm delighted to welcome Richard Stiennon to Risk Roundup. Richard is the author of Surviving Cyberwar, published by Government Institutes in 2010, and Up and to the Right, Strategy and Tactics of Analytic Influence, IT Harvest Press 2012, and There Will Be Cyberwar, How the Move to NCW Has Set the Stage for Cyberwar. Welcome, Richard. I'm delighted to have you on Risk Roundup.
Hi, Jayshree. Thank you so much for having me.
Great, wonderful, Richard. So I think for the benefit of our global viewers and listeners, let me start with the very fundamental questions. Are we already in the cyber war? Are nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia, are they already in the cyber war openly?
Well, it always comes down to definitions. I've seen, various academic sources argue that cyber war is impossible because there's no kinetic effects. And then even when I publish a book saying there will be cyber war, I get a lot of criticism. People say, well, we're already at cyber war. Because cyber war in a large sense could just mean two parties engaging in attacks, information attacks, propaganda against each other. You see even a Twitter battle between two people on Twitter being termed a cyber war. So you have to get, to me, cyber war would be the use of computer network attacks in processing and promulgating the intent to project force by a nation state or at least a militarized organization. So we have to include non-nation states in this because, of course, we have caliphates and hacker organizations and terrorist organizations. They can use the same techniques that nation states can. So the short answer is yes, there are obvious signs of nations battling each other in cyberspace. And the most obvious is, of course, Russia versus Ukraine and some of the Baltic states. We saw Russia use techniques against both Estonia and Georgia that were part of military endeavors. So the case of Estonia was more of a propaganda campaign. But it did significant damage to an entire country by extended DDoS attacks, denial of service attacks on all of their infrastructure. In the case of Georgia, it was an information and DDoS attack on their communication infrastructure during an invasion. Now, of course, that was 2008 that occurred. During the incursions and continuing battles in Ukraine, it's pretty obvious that Russia is supporting the hackers that now have taken down a power grid inside Ukraine. So that's going to be one of the classic signs and I guess weapons of future cyber wars is attacking infrastructure. But my concern is the next phase. It's when you take advantage of weaknesses in traditional military systems. So radar systems, targeting systems, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance systems, command and control systems, precision targeting. All of those were developed over 10 years ago and have very little cyber defense embedded in them. So future war will involve attacks against those systems and disabling them when they're most needed. And I'm afraid that the results of battles will be impacted by whichever side has the upper cyber hand.
Yes, yes, no, I agree with you on that. But Richard, I mean, the way you just described the definition of cyber war, or that nation states usually get into this conflict, but the reality of cyber war is so much different, Richard, as we know that anybody who has good knowledge about information communication technology, who is really advanced in this knowledge, can create these attacks. So now the battlefield, cyber battlefield, is entirely different. It is no longer the nation states fighting wars. It could be a single individual fighting a war with a whole nation. It could be a group of people. The reality and the dynamics are so much different than what the nations are used to.
Completely agree. It's in a sense, well, one, it's asymmetric. In that the attacker has a tremendous advantage. They can always find a target that they can somehow attack and damage in some way, similar to the way that Saudi Aramco had 30,000 computer PCs completely wiped by attackers, and organizations in South Korea, same thing. And we don't know exactly who those attackers were, but probably a very small group of people. And it's also a continuously asymmetric form of warfare, in that once you use an attack methodology, your attacker, your attackee, your target is now aware of the tool you use and can start to build defenses if it's not too late, right? If tanks didn't also roll across the borders. So an arms race is going to be an interesting metaphor to follow, because certainly nation states, the US, Israel, Iran, Russia, China are all developing attack methodologies and tools. Once they use them, then they're not as effective anymore, because especially the parties that weren't under attack get to see those tools, right? So some of the researchers, your Kaspersky's and Rapid7's and FireEye's of the world will discover that tool and technique and publish it, and people can build the defenses. So, obviously my advice for all defenders is to do a better job of defending.
Yes.
I don't really want to provide advice to attackers.
Yes.
But that said, nation states are looking at cyber attack as a non-lethal way of projecting force and accomplishing their goals. So if you recall the Stuxnet attack on Iran, no missiles were involved, no bombs were involved, and yet the United States, with help from Israel, were able to slow down Iran's nuclear refinement capability. That was really a wake-up call for, I think, every nation in the world to realize the power and their susceptibility to outside influence.
Yes, yes. Now I hear you on that. But see, your use of term non-lethal ways, that is to me very, questionable, because non-lethal to what? Non-lethal to human beings? That, yeah, you would not see, people losing lives in this cyber warfare probably, but you will see a huge economic impact. It could destroy economies. I mean, the lethal word can be used in so many different ways. You could be lethal to industries. You could target industries. You could target economy. So there is so much damage that it would create, and people and industries and nations probably haven't started thinking about it. So it seems that cyber warfare has been openly discussed since 1990s, and cyber strike has already been part of many nations' military strategy. Not all nations, but many nations. Now, it seems that it's only a matter of time that cyber warfare will escalate and destabilize economy. Now, there are some people who would argue that, it has already started destabilizing the global economy. do you see that cyber warfare is probably playing a role in destabilizing the global economy that we are seeing currently and we saw over the years?
So not yet. I agree with you that cyber attacks could destabilize economies. I think the banking economy, which has been under attack from cyber criminals, is kind of there's a relationship between the cyber criminals and the banks where they don't want to destabilize it. They want the banks to continue operating as is so they can continue to leach or filter funds out of it. That said, when the chips are down and companies no longer have a tight financial bond between them, for instance, if sanctions against Russia got to the point where Russia was no longer able to participate in global markets, then they would be able to attack those global markets in a reprisal to say, hey, if we don't get access to them, neither do you. So I can see future potential of that. Certainly, the latest plans that we've learned about from David Sanger writing in the New York Times for something called Nitro Zeus was actually a full-fledged U.S. military plan to engage in all-out cyber attack against Iran in the case that the nuclear talks fell through. Luckily they didn't, but some of the expense, the millions of dollars and the thousands of personnel that were involved in that are going to have repercussions, right? They probably did deploy things in Iran, which the researchers are going to discover, and all that money that they spent on these attacks are going to be not only wasted, but also revealed to people that didn't have the money to do that investment. So I seriously think that the future is going to be much worse than what we're seeing today. Today we're seeing, just sporadic and maybe carefully orchestrated, but less impactful things like information warfare, or one guy on Twitter said he calls it cybrid war. So it's a hybrid cyber war.
Yes.
Which I thought was a pretty good term. The hiring teams of trolls to try and influence public perception, and from that influence policy. That we know that certainly Russia has been well reported on the cyber trolls that they employ in St. Petersburg. China and the UK have publicly acknowledged programs of cyber influencers. So, the people we meet on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn could very well be paid for hire and trying to engage in this low-level cyber war.
Right. No, I hear you on that. Now, we are facing this chilling new reality of cyber war in which no nation or its industries or governments, academia, individuals, or any organization, any entity within any of the component of a nation, they are not safe from this attack. So, are any of them prepared? Do you see, what are your observations? Because you work in this, you have done so much research in this area, and you have already seen what is happening across nations. You have the direct exposure to that. What are your observations, that are any nation prepared for this cyber warfare?
If there is a nation, it would be Estonia, because they've experienced it. They have they've thought of what they're going to do next time this happens to them. They have essentially a militia of volunteers that are ready to come to help. But Estonia is very, very small, right? It's and building a coherent defensive plan is probably easier there than just about any other nation. But for the other nations, I see them all as completely unprepared. They haven't learned the lessons that Estonia did. They have spent, unfortunately, much more on cyber attack methodologies, because that's the exciting thing for militaries, right? It's much more exciting to create a new department to develop some new attack methodologies than it is to actually look at your own IT infrastructure, not only for your military, but also for your country, and fix it so it's not as vulnerable to attack. And they're just willy-nilly going down the path of preparing to engage in cyber attack without any plan for defending against cyber attack.
That is very, that is a cause of concern, obviously.
Sure it is, yeah.
Now, yes. Now, there are reports that the data on the majority of the machines on the main computer network of Saudi Aramco had been destroyed at one point, as you also talked, at the beginning of the session. Do you know what was the economic impact of that digital destruction of Saudi Aramco in Saudi Arabia? Do you have some numbers, or
Yeah, I don't have numbers. Obviously there's the immediate cost of replacing hard drives. Saudi Aramco deployed people to China in order to buy up 50,000 hard drives so they could do the replacement. So that alone must have cost millions of dollars. The lost business and business efficiency, the expense associated with 30,000 employees who are non-productive for 3 or 4 months would be another larger number that you calculate. When the U.S. military was infected with a worm called agent.btz, they called it Buckshot Yankee. It took them 9 months to clean up 3 million machines, and the budget associated with that was $1 billion. So that's gives you some idea of the scopes just from the IT costs of recovering from one of these. Now, when a power outage occurs, and you start having the costs of replacing plant and equipment, the human costs if hospitals are without power or people who are confined to their homes because medical conditions start to die, those costs are obviously going to be astronomical.
Yes, you are right about that. I mean, then the data that has been lost, what information has been lost, we don't even know what was stolen. The impact of that, economic impact, it's probably not even known that, how much damage has been done because of any particular cyber attack. So yeah, it is a really very serious concern. But let me ask you this, just like in any conventional war, the targeted nations for cyber attacks, or it's any of its internal targets of a nation, they maybe when they are attacked at that point they cannot do anything, but they will prepare once they are attacked and they will retaliate. So where do you see the conflict ending? Now Saudi Aramco was targeted. They are going to retaliate at some point when they find out the details about who was behind the attack and what damage they created, so they are not going to sit back. Maybe at that point they were not ready, but they will be ready, eventually, because this is a war. So where do you see this conflict ending?
Well, some interesting prospects there. If you think about it, wouldn't the world be a wonderful place if we had more of Gandhi's philosophy of passive resistance, right? So if somebody attacks you, you don't do anything. That rarely happens in nation states. In any nation state, the people in power, be they democratically elected or not, feel forced to respond to overt physical attacks. So incursions across the border, terrorist attacks against their personnel wherever they may be in the world. We see diplomatic and sometimes physical responses rather quickly. In cyber attacks, the leaders, the people who actually have to pull the trigger in order to respond, also take advantage of the plausible deniability. So quite often the attack isn't public, so it's behind the scenes. And for instance, the Stuxnet attack against Iran should have created some sort of response against the United States. And I'm not sure that response was the one attributed to Iranian hackers, where they engaged in denial of service attacks on U.S. banks, for instance, or the attack on Saudi Aramco. How is that an attack on the United States? So it may well be that the plans and investments are continuing, because a proportional attack for Stuxnet would be an attack on the U.S. power grid, which we haven't seen yet. And likewise, in a proportional response to the attack on Saudi Aramco would be an attack on Iran's natural resource abilities. And the governments are always wary of engaging in these escalations and may not want to. the right response to any attack like this is first solidify your defenses. So if you step up your response, you're not subject to even worse retaliatory attacks. And all these attacks, and any attacks between nation states, be they trade wars or sanctions against issuing visas, the big worry is they always could escalate to actual shooting wars.
Yes, yes, no, you're right. Now, across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia, at this point, they all work in silo. Even if any or all components of a nations are targeted or attacked, the intelligence about what or how much damage has been done is never clear or never communicated, because they don't. A lot of times they don't want to, share that, because that would, give an impression to others that they are vulnerable, they have security vulnerabilities, so they will face more attacks, or they want to avoid legal liability. And there are a lot of different reasons why they don't share the information. So moreover, we still do not have effective technologies and tools that will allow any entity within any component of NGIO to know that they are under attack. At times it takes them months before they know that they were attacked. So most nations or entities within an NGIO would not even know that they were under attack, what they lost, or what was compromised, or what damage has been done to their economy. So this is a very critical risk. We don't have effective tools, technologies to know that we are under attack, and how to go forward on that.
Well, there are effective tools. It's just nobody's purchased them and uses them effectively. And certainly there are open source tools as well. So, but if you went to a typical NGO, Doctors Without Borders, they have IT infrastructure for communications, website, usual office things that we do. They're probably, completely owned, as we say, by, some attackers somewhere, probably multiple attackers. And, it'd be very simple to approach a security firm, even some nonprofit security organizations that would come in and investigate and tell you that. But a lot of people don't want to know the answer. They hide under a blanket of we have nothing worth stealing. We can't be damaged. If somebody installs a crypto locker on a laptop, we'll just go to our backtop, or we'll get a new laptop or something. There's this complacency at all levels, at the individual level, all the way up to the largest organizations in the world. I'm a big believer in technology, and of course, since I follow 1,400 IT security vendors or products, I know that the technology is there to counter 99% of these attacks. So in the perfect world, everybody listening to this should look at what they could do in order to improve their defensive posture.
Yes, you are right about that, and I was not aware that those effective technologies are there, because when you hear that the governments are attacked and they did not know that they were attacked for months, you would think that maybe there are not effective technologies out there, because at least the responsible governments would take and implement all those technologies across their departments and agencies. So if there are technology available, if there is technology available, and if corporations or governments or academia or any entity within a nation, if they are not responsible in in implementing, then that is another risk that we are seeing right there, that they are not aware of what kind of damage these attacks could do. So, and it's not that if one entity within a nation is attacked, they say, okay, forget about it, we don't need to worry about it. But if they are damaged, there are so many other integration points of that corporation or a country or a government that other people would have been damaged. So there is a legal liability, there is a financial liability because of this, and
sure,
we need to have proper understanding of that. But let's talk about this, something that I have been thinking about for a long time, that there is a growing concern that the tools that are used for ethically attacking networks and gathering information in penetration tests, because a lot of corporations and entities, they're requesting penetration testing to make sure that how strong the defenses are. But there are some concerns rising that this is a very unique way or very revolutionary way of doing espionage, that the corporate companies who are in fact doing this penetration testing, not all of them of course, but some of them, that they are disguised as corporations who do penetration testing, and they are ethically legally invited to do that, and that they are just collecting information. So, if is there any audit done on these ethical hackers and tools and technology they use? How much do we know that they are not misusing their access to spy and gather intelligence? How would we know that?
Yeah, great question. So, as always, it comes down to reputation. So, the reputation of the principals of the organization. Obviously, you're not going to hire somebody off the street. Though, if you know them, personally, sometimes those people off the street are the most skilled ethical hackers. I used to be a penetration tester for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and obviously, that was an organization that large companies would trust, right? They had to, because there's so much at stake. So I would look at that organization's ability to do background checks on the people they employ, have extremely good, contracts with them that assign liability and protections for your information. And obviously check their credentials and talk to other customers that have used them in the past. Now, penetration testing, if you're not doing penetration testing with trusted auditors, you're being penetrated or tested essentially every day by this vast galaxy of attackers, right? They're doing it for you today. All you have to do is start looking at what's happening on your network, and you'll see it happening. And so you can see that, wow, they're attacking a particularly vulnerable database. So boom, you've just for free gotten that information without hiring somebody to do a penetration test. Mm-hmm. So start looking at your network. You're being penetration tested right now.
Yes, you are right about that. Now let's talk about a program called Mosquito. I'm sure you heard about that. It is reported that not only did Mosquito hide the fact that it was stealing information, but its spy methods were very unique, that it could be updated, it could be reprogrammed remotely, and it could develop any technology and process that can be used for any work in cyberspace as anti-malware or as a penetration testing tool. So it was very unique program. Now, what my concern is that, there is no governing body or a requirement to get license to use such tools. If you look at it, that's even if you want to hire an electrician, you would look for a certified electrician. They have to get that certification. And that electricians, there's not much impact. If you hire someone who is not certified, maybe sometimes, a little fire would happen, if they don't do wiring properly. We are talking about developing softwares that has such huge impact on nation's economy, on so much more. So why is software industry taken so lightly, and why is it given a pass? And why are there no requirements for something as serious as developing this kind of tools, cyber tools, or developing, any kind of malwares, or you name it? So why is there no discussion about that? That let's have some kind of governing body for that.
Well, there's discussion, but obviously no action being taken. Certainly within the halls of Congress, there's a lot of interest in certification requirements, but ultimately they come down to that technology is moving too fast. So electricity hasn't changed in 100 years, so you can certify people in how to use it. And same with auto mechanics and airplane mechanics, right? Very, very slow moving technology that can be regulated in that way. Software just changes so rapidly. Every 6 months there's a new family of tools being used, and anyone can develop it in their home shop and home network. So I think that's the reason. Now, there are professional certifications for ethical hackers, several the certified ethical hacker certification in particular, which would at least be something you could ask people to demonstrate that they have. the CISSP certification actually spends a lot of time on ethics, and you have to remain ethical in order to keep that certification. So there are, there are a few in the beginnings, but this is a matter of reputation and trust. And we've have institutions that have been established for hundreds of years just to create reputation and trust, and even those fail us. All of our financial institutions have fallen down on the job in that way, and certainly our government institutions as well. So it's going to be an ongoing battle.
Right. No, you're right, and I think you made a good point that this is a very rapidly changing field. That tools and technologies are changing so rapidly, so it's very difficult to regulate it in a traditional manner. So we'll have to come up with a model that is different than the traditional model of regulation. So that is something where we need to put our thoughts on how to effectively manage this. I won't say regulate, but how to effectively govern this so that we have some responsible development of tools and technologies, and there is as little as damage that we can expect from those developments. Now let me ask you about the malware known as Flame, which according to some reports appeared in Europe and eventually spread to thousands of machines in Middle East. Now it is said that this particular malware uh, was very unique in the way that you could reprogram it remotely, and it could turn on microphone even when I'm not using laptop, or when I'm not trying to do anything on that. It would turn it on, it would record the calls and all sorts of things without anybody's knowledge that they are being monitored, or they whatever we type on the laptop that, or computer, that they would know what we are typing. So these, how, I mean, when you see that thousands and thousands of computers were affected because of this malware, do you know how the nations that were affected, how they responded, or how they are thinking of responding to such attacks? Or
So
they didn't even know about it, that they were attacked?
they certainly know about it, and they're paying attention. Flame was brilliant and remarkable for the fact that it used Microsoft Update as its delivery mechanism. So that's unique, and one of those levels of trust I was talking about, right? We trust our software providers such as Microsoft and Adobe and Apple to, when they push an update to us, we trust that update. Now they built in digital signatures that are a pretty strong way of authenticating that the update is coming from Microsoft. But in Flame's case, the attackers, probably U.S. intelligence, the NSA, figured out how to create their own digital signature, mimicking, spoofing Microsoft's. A very, very expensive proposition. One researcher said it probably cost $250,000 of compute time alone in order to establish that. So Flame was highly targeted. The people who received it, didn't spread like a worm. People who received it were targeted by a nation state. And I think, unfortunately, the response is, oh my gosh, we have to get that ability in order to be so sophisticated too, because look at all the great intelligence you can gather. So the response has been an escalation in the cyber war.
I see. So it's an entirely different kind of response you would see. I mean, they also want this kind of tool, so they could
have. Ooh, that's cool. I want it too.
Oh my goodness, that's very interesting. But you made an interesting point that that when you get emails or from companies like Microsoft, and when you see attachments of Word or PowerPoint, which are normally used to create some kind of interest in opening those attachments. What is the legal liability you see for those corporations when their products or when their tools are used for cyber warfare?
Oh yeah, I think they're pretty good at avoiding any liability. They just create some clauses in their acceptable use policies that obviate them from that liability or excuse them from it. So I like to take the approach that we're all responsible for our own security. If you fail in your security measures, it's your fault. Not the, certainly we should do what we can to take down the attackers. But if you're running an unpatched Windows system, heck, if you're using Windows to do critical work on, I think you're at fault. You know, this is the machine that the attackers know how to target. You should use something else. You know, use a Google Chromebook, use something in the cloud, use an Apple computer. You'll be at least not as easy to attack if you're doing that. You know, you just have to take extraordinary measures to protect your own data, and every organization has to.
Right. I know. I think that's a good suggestion, and I hear you on that. That security is each individual's affair, and that's what we believe at Risk Group too. That security is no longer a government affair; it's an NGOI affair. Means every corporation, every industry, every academia organization, and individuals, they have to be responsible for their own security. So you're right about that. Now there are reports that a virus named Duku, which targeted very few machines, but they began collecting information about the computer systems controlling industrial machinery and to diagram the commercial relationships of various organizations in those targeted nations. Now, it seems when you look at each of these, malware or each of these, cyber warfare tool that was used, that behind each of that attack was underlying, intention of economic impact, economic warfare. Every malware or attack that you would see and that you would analyze, every cyber warfare tool, every nation that has been targeted, either they're trying to steal their intelligence about how they're doing things, processes or designs, and all sorts of things. So it is in a sense economic warfare disguised as cyber warfare. Cyber tools are just the weapons, but basically this is economic warfare going on in this digital global age. So how would you respond to that? This is a economic warfare going on in a digital global age using the cyber tools and artificial intelligence and information communication technology. And nations, who would be these nations who are trying? Is it one nation trying to gather all that intelligence from every nation, or is it many nations trying to do the same thing?
Well, Dooku in particular has been attributed to the United States by Kaspersky. But most nation states, and China in particular, are responsible for industrial espionage. U.S. through affiliates in Canada are accused of doing the same thing. So yes, industrial espionage is taking advantage of this windfall of easy intelligence gathering. But there's also diplomatic espionage. And right now, the things I look out for are reconnaissance for future attacks. And those are most worrisome. So I look at the power grid, and the software that's most seen there are the family in the black energy group of malware. And that particularly is targeted. We've seen it in the Ukraine. It's widely spread throughout the U.S. Power generation and transmission organizations. And that's gathering intelligence, right? Though it also can do damage, as apparently it did with a separate download in Ukraine. But it's a foot in the door, right? So it's a beachhead, if you want, inside critical infrastructure that could be further manipulated in order to do damage once they understand exactly how that infrastructure works.
Yes, you're right about that. Now, it seems that as of today, nations do not openly declare cyber war. It's more like covert operations, which is done in secret. Nations do not even want to acknowledge that they are behind this, attack. Are there any discussions to bringing some structure to this cyber warfare with unanimous rules of engagement?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about creating norms, and while we can get nations to agree not to engage in attacks, and China and Russia have an open agreement not to do that, and the U.S. and China supposedly have at least a handshake deal not to do that, and obviously it's still continuing from both sides probably. So I think the only declared cyber wars have been created by anonymous, right, with their various operations. And of course, they're fairly ineffectual compared to real nations. But for that matter, there aren't very many declared wars either, and yet there are many, many wars and battlegrounds around the world. So, I think, if you think about it, that's probably been the biggest impact of the United Nations. Is nobody ever says they're actually at war anymore.
Yes.
So I don't see declared cyber wars being much of the future.
Okay, good analysis. Let's see, what the nations will do in the coming years. But now let's talk about the malware designed for physical sabotage. It is reported that as early as 2007, this is of course, the Stuxnet that we are talking about. Now, it was designed for physical sabotage of machinery, and there are also reports that Stuxnet was the first autonomous weapon with an algorithm, that means machine pulling the trigger, artificial intelligence-based cyber warfare. Now, this is entirely different, story that we are talking about. This is a very serious concern. What can you tell our global viewers and listeners about the artificial intelligence-based cyber war?
So the autonomous part of it is most interesting to me, because the advanced defense techniques that I was referring to earlier involve, monitoring your network, seeing the early indications that an attack is starting, and then trying to disrupt it before it's successful. And today, that's the attackers are working in real time, but they're sitting at their computers and they're working regular shifts, 9 to 5. So you've got some minutes to hours to respond. It's the future, when those attacks are automated and autonomous, that we have to get to the point where we can defend against attacks autonomously, which does take some level of artificial intelligence, right? So you need machine decision making, if that's artificial intelligence, in order to make the decision when to shut off a network connection or turn off a computer or clean it, etc. So certainly there's a future in automated tools that attempt to respond to defensive measures. We're starting to see some of that intelligence built into malware that can check to see if it's in a hosted virtual environment that would probably be a sandbox meant to detect it when it's detonated. So they just sit and wait, right? So that's very simplistic, algorithmic artificial intelligence. The future will be to see if malware is developed that has a purpose, but not all the techniques built into it, and it develops its own techniques as it goes, right? If the purpose is to steal a particular type of information, it could just sit around and wait until it sees that information and then encrypt it and exfiltrate it. So, great question. It's definitely in the future.
Right. No, but I mean, there is also something that is a cause of concern, that the way this whole Stuxnet operation was displayed, it was very, very, very effective and very, very capable in operation. But what is concerning me is that there are reports that particular Stuxnet malware, or whatever you want to, however you want to define it, that escaped. And the question is, how did it escape? If Stuxnet was based on AI algorithms, this is a cause of serious concern, as a source code of something as dangerous as this is on loose. Do you have any information about, how this escaped, and, where is this source code, and how many people has access to this source code of Stuxnet?
Yeah, so no information as to how it escaped, other than that's always been one of the worries with any cyber weapon, is that eventually the world will learn of it, right? So certainly the person who's attacked has the data somewhere in their organization. In this case, it did escape, so the researchers in Belarus could find it and analyze it and tell the world about it, and other organizations could then look for samples of it. I think that's just one of the drawbacks of sophisticated cyber weapons. Once you use them, then your adversary has access to them as well. And as far as how many people have access to it, anybody who wants a copy of Stuxnet can get a copy.
Yes, you're right about it. Now, there are reports that some malwares have a self-destruction module, just like any well-planned intelligence operations that generally include false safe plans if it gets discovered, then it destroys themselves. So this kind of sophistication and capability comes only from very well developed, very well advanced programs that has a huge support and funding. So which, based on your knowledge, which nations have developed such highly effective, sophisticated cyber weapons, and what are their motives? I'm sure it's not one nation; it would be more than one nation.
Sure. If I had to list the nations that have the capabilities, and I suspect have already done this work, I would include obviously United States, Israel, Russia, China, but also India and Pakistan. And there's opportunity for any nation to get into this game. They get to hire 20 PhDs in computer science and be up and running in less than 6 months. So there's no very, very low barrier to entry to get into this.
Right. What is your understanding about each individual nation's cyber capabilities? You just said India, Pakistan, and China. And where are they in terms of their cyber capabilities? Because when I look at some nations, I don't see that there is much any development happening there.
Yeah, which we didn't see much development inside the United States until Edward Snowden leaked those documents. So it's a guessing game, but there's been enough warning since Stuxnet that everybody can understand the potential for these tools. There's academic writing about cyber attack and its importance from 1993 out of China. And we know a lot of the espionage work comes from their universities. So we know China's fairly far advanced. To me, you just have to look at, any organization with a technical military, which includes most countries in Europe and possibly countries in South America. And then, China, maybe Japan, Taiwan for sure. All must have cyber capabilities.
That's interesting. Now, there are many nations who would like to harm United States if they can. Billions of dollars are being invested to develop cyber capabilities to attack US. And then if any US enemy nation succeeds successfully attacking US, it would bring probably a collapse of global economy due to the heavy dependencies on US economy. While success of US is not taken well by many struggling nations or even many successful nations, I would say, it is also well known that without US, the global economy will collapse. Now, how to prevent the damage to the global economy? How do you think we can contain the cyber warfare ambitions of some nations who want to hurt or damage United States?
So, one, I'm a lot more optimistic about the United States' survivability, and I don't think the impacts will be as great as the worst case scenarios. So in the worst case scenario is a major power outage, communication outage, Wall Street having to shut for several days, etc. And I think the global economy is resilient enough to withstand that, though the expense, will be measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. But I think it is, I can't say this often enough, right? It's a responsibility of every country to ensure that they're not susceptible to that level of disruptive attacks. And yes, it's going to cost money to do that, but it's money that they should have been spending all along. So they're in debt, right? They've got a cybersecurity debt. So if a power grid hasn't deployed strong security everywhere for 15 years, when they should have easily 15 years ago, they've gotten lucky that they haven't suffered a major attack in that time frame. They took a gamble, just like if you fail to pay your life insurance policy for 2 years and you're still alive, you just saved all that money. But all that time, as you would say, you're at risk, right? You're exposed to a risk. So.
Yes, you are absolutely right about that. But you are right that US has more resources, so they are more resilient to that, because even if it's attacked, they have enough financial resources, other resources, so that quickly they can get back up. While many small nations, they don't have that luxury. So if they are attacked, that would be serious for them because they don't have resources to get back up. So that is a cause of concern for those small nations or developing nations, I would say.
Yeah.
Now,
Luckily, they're not as reliant on that technology, right? So even
yes,
though, so certainly in South America and Africa, the only telecommunication infrastructure is cellular. So that is very, very vulnerable. They could lose their cellular access quite quickly. And they have very few connections to the internet, as we saw in Egypt when President Mubarak was able to shut off internet access for an entire country with only a couple of fiber links into the country. So, resiliency is another aspect of this whole debate, and every country should try and encourage more connectivity. So you've got alternatives if a particular attacker wants to, plant a mine in your landing point for your undersea cables.
yes, yes. I mean, you are right that at this point, those nations don't have too much connectivity, and they can quickly shut off their internet connection. But at the same time, with the advances in Internet of Things, the points of connections are going to increase, rapidly. So, and there will be innovations how people can target or do cyber attacks. They will figure out a way that without the main internet connection, how they can use other sources and they can attack that. So there a lot of advances are happening. So we'll have to wait and see how the developments happen. But let me ask you this: this is something just based on your affiliations that you are under attack. That is reported that Qatar's state-owned natural gas company Rasgas was also hit by malware named Shamoon. While Qatar, home to 3 US military bases, is among America's closest allies in Middle East, and therefore they became convenient proxy target. So proxy target approach is very interesting. How would a nation like United States, protect all their, affiliates or their supporters or countries that are their allies? How would they protect them? Because if just by their affiliation, if those nations are targeted, then is it moral responsibility of United States to protect them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't think the United States can even protect its own organizations, right? So 80% of telecommunication and power grid are actually controlled by the government of the United States. So once again, you can't do cybersecurity top down. You can't dictate what has to be done. It would be too expensive. It has to be from bottoms up. So every single organization has to protect itself. When there are dependencies such as that, so if there were a critical source of, some material that was absolutely needed, be it a rare earth mineral or memory for computers, etc., you have to recognize that and do the risk calculations and have alternatives to it, or help them be aware of the exposure that they have, and that they also should take stronger measures to protect themselves.
Yeah.
We can't look at this as a top-down. United States being responsible for more than its own security is hard enough to take, but the fact that it can't even defend its own government agencies from attacks. So the Pentagon itself has suffered in 5 years. It's had to rebuild its email infrastructure twice because of attacks from outside. So,
Right.
yeah,
So
a lot of work to do.
everyone is on their own, right? I mean, US would say that okay, if you are going to get a nuclear attack or something, we will protect you because we have the capabilities, defensive missiles, all those things that we would be able to protect you. But if you are attacked by cyber warfare, we won't be able.
You're on your own.
You're on your own. Okay, that's very interesting. Now, there are reports that many governments buy bugs from black markets. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So black markets and now fairly open markets, right? They offer to purchase these, and they'll work with researchers that don't have to remain anonymous and steal the zero-day vulnerability, acquire them from those researchers.
That's very interesting. Now, this is the current battle going on between U.S. government and Apple. That government is trying to exploit the security vulnerability of its technology companies so as to get an upper hand in cyber intelligence and warfare. The ongoing battle between Apple and FBI for the backdoor is a perfect example of the lack of effective risk management framework, I would say. Each nation has at some point in their journey asked their private entities to divest or invest with other nations based on their policies and goals. In the current times, as banks and financial institutions are compelled to prevent money laundering by organized crime and terrorist and finance network, should not the internet service providers and technology and social businesses be compelled to crack down on the communication of terrorism while the government agencies want to access encrypted data that could help in the investigation? There is a resistance to this demand, and I firmly believe that Apple should not give a backdoor, because giving a backdoor would make them everyone vulnerable to their financial bank accounts and everything, because then anybody could access that. But at the same time, they do have a responsibility. If there is a communication of terrorism or other warfare going on using their tools on their technology, then they have a moral responsibility to be able to know that and to report it to the right authorities. So that, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm quite the libertarian, so I don't believe that doing things that in and of themselves are not illegal should be interfered with. So, for instance, and I might go over the top when I say, look at transferring large amounts of cash between countries. Isn't immoral for sure, right? If I personally had $10,000 and wanted to take it to a relative in Canada, why is that illegal? It's not immoral. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. Now, mind you, that's the way people hide money from taxes and all the rest. So I can see how the government and law enforcement tends to take they overstep their bounds. So now they're going to say certain types of communication we have a legal right to get, and I don't believe that's the case. Regardless of whether you're plotting the overthrow of the government or some heinous crime, that communication isn't illegal. And you could argue that the communication of it itself isn't immoral, right? Acts are immoral. Communications aren't immoral.
It's
so,
not. It's
so
not
anyways, so they should just stay out of that. The unintended consequences of opening up and destroying privacy and communications are far, far greater than the marginal help that they're going to get after the fact. I mean, this is law enforcement. I wish that they were better at stopping attacks than they are, but that's the way it is.
No, I mean, I hear your point about that, and I would never, support that notion that there should be a backdoor, because that is just making everyone vulnerable for security. So that should not be there. But at the same time, I firmly believe that for managing risk, there is responsibility that each one of us has. And if there is if banks and financial institutions are forced to monitor on the money laundering and all that and notify to the authorities, then I think there needs to be development of a process by which, if there is a communication happening which is going to be detrimental to that particular nation, or there is going to be a attack coming to that nation, and then there needs to be a way to notify the authorities, so there is enough intelligence, because otherwise there is not going to be it's not going to be possible to manage many critical security risks. So we will have to see how nations come up with the proper strategy, but this is something that will need to be discussed more coming in the coming years and months. So we'll see. Now, cyber weapons are easy to make, Richard, and that potential use is unlimited. One doesn't have to be a nation state to declare a cyber war. They just have to be very, very smart. That's all. So, and there are a lot of people who have a lot of causes. They are trying to, do something noble. I mean, there are a lot of good causes that they are working for, and there are, some bad, intentions that they have. So, this is a whole new world of unknowns where anyone around you can be an enemy trying to attack you. It's a whole new world of, warfare. How can anyone protect themselves from these unknowns?
Well, first of all, attempt to not have enemies. That'd be a good thing. So be nice when you're online. Um, you take the basic steps. You do what you can, right? So encrypt your data. Use methodologies for authenticating that are limit your risks and exposure. And then larger organizations have to enforce strict policies for internet use and control.
Yes, yes. Now, there is a great benefit, I believe, in clear definitions and guidelines of any warfare, irrespective of whether it's a conventional warfare or cyber warfare. The challenges with cyber warfare is not only nation states are involved, but many individuals, like we just talked, are involved that have sufficient intelligence and smartness to get involved in that. So, how would we come up with a cyber warfare guidelines, or some kind of framework or some kind of understanding that would include each and everyone, like individuals, government, industries, organizations, academia? How would we shape that kind of guidelines?
Well, most nations are creating what they call cybersecurity strategies, and they've attempted that, right? But they started 5 years ago before they realized some of the ramifications. So I think they should all go back and look at that, start to work with each other on what those norms are, and they might be, we will not engage in cyber attacks against a population or critical infrastructure. I doubt you'll ever get them to agree not to attack military communications or military equipment, right, and the technology in those. So at least they should get that one step ahead. I think it's too early overall. The major changes in the way nation states work with each other have all come about after major conflicts. So it may unfortunately be that it takes another conflict to create that conversation.
Right. Now, cyber war is more than technology. We know that it's a human and non-human intelligence, processes, frameworks, and much more. The battlefield stands to be fundamentally altered by the information and communication technology revolution at both the strategic as well as tactical levels in a digital global age. So, our nation's government and defense departments understanding the full reality of these changes that are associated with the cyber war?
I don't think so, not yet. And certainly that's evident in their lack of understanding of what's called software assurance, right? So if you're going to have devices with software, you have to design that software in such a way that it doesn't have a lot of vulnerabilities, these so-called 0 days in them. Those were designed in the past with the idea that, well, hackers aren't going to have access to my fancy new jet plane, so they probably won't be able to find those bugs. But with the advent of cyber espionage, that's no longer the case. The attackers may have access to the source code and be able to develop those attacks. So I think the biggest mind shift and change is one that every organization has to deal with that produces technology, is that they have to actually design that technology to be as impervious as possible from cyber attack.
Right. No, I hear you on that. Now, the implications of any revolutionary technology is not understood at first, most of the times. That was true of, when the tanks were, created, the machine guns and all, other
drones.
Yeah, though they were, created. It may take time for NGIO to realize that inserting the new cyber technology into old ways of doing things may create new efficiencies and new risks. Even as some activities like digitalization become more efficient for some component of a nation, like you would see that industries are very good at digitalization efforts, and they're rapidly advancing. They're finding new ways of doing things using this new technology like Amazon and Uber and all that. But governments are very, very slow in this area. And at times you will see that, they would buy all these technologies. They would be very eager to purchase that and they would implement that. But everything around it, like processes and everything that needs to change, they are not good at that. So most of the times, even if they get, new technology, it's ineffective because that has not been properly implemented and there are not proper change management processes that have been implemented or used to have the full potential of the technology. So the challenge is, uh, how would you, even if these governments implement technology, the ecosystem around that remains the same, creating failures, inefficiencies, and complications in an age where everything is connected. So if industries are advancing, at a rapid speed, and governments are not advancing, and some other industry, I mean, not all industries are advancing, at a proper speed, but how would we, if there are imbalances within a nation, how would we protect them, overall? Because this cyber security is a very different, era where, if one component of a nation is, not secure or not at a maturity level, and they are not, very effective in managing the security, then everyone gets impacted because of that, because there are so many interdependencies. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you raise a very, very important point. Governments were established, post 1450, in order to maintain a stable relationship and establish rule of law, property rights, etc. So that lasted for 300 or 400 years. And then we had the technological revolutions that seem to be occurring every 2 or 3 years now. And governments just were not built in order to be nimble and responsive to major changes in the way people live their lives, earn their money, communicate, etc. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge of the century is how governments can become nimble. We know that nimbleness is associated with being smaller, not bigger. So hopefully there'll be changes. It's going to take decades unless there's the kind of rapid changes that most of us don't like to see in governments.
Yes.
But for large established democratic nations, they're going to have to learn to adapt quickly and change their overall structure so that they can do that. And it's not going to happen through the regular means.
Yes, no, you're right about that. I mean, see, the new way of doing things, that means new way of governing. What are the different processes of government that you can do, more effectively by using less resources, and that would cost, less? How can we, govern better? How can we develop that kind of government, digital government? Those are the things,
Yeah, well, luckily we have technology, right? So now we have communities,
exactly.
online communities, and maybe technology itself could help us. And there are, you've seen rapid development of smaller communities in the open source world that prove that humans can organize without the rule of law and force that state governments have. So maybe that's the hope. Maybe technology is its own answer.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And, we have to start thinking strategically that if we don't, define or come up with new ways of doing things, or if our industries don't come up with new way of, developing products or services, or if our governments don't, come up with new way of, governance or new way of management and all that, then somebody else will. And then, they will have the upper hand, because, this is a very, very intense competition that is going on. And we have to start thinking strategically, which I don't see, unfortunately, across industries and nations, that people are so much overwhelmed with, just complying with the, compliance risk and legal risk and financial risk, worrying about that they are not thinking about strategic risk, which is the, most important, which has the biggest impact. And same goes for governments also, across nations. I mean, you go to countries and you will hear them talking about their age-old problems, not thinking about what is what is hitting them now, or what will hit them in the coming years. So it's very unfortunate, and it's very, worrisome, in fact. So let's wait and see how this shapes up. But what is your opinion about where would cyber warfare fit in the history of warfare?
Well, it certainly has a place. I believe already we've entered that era where every single battle between technologically advanced countries will incorporate cyber warfare. So we probably already saw that in multiple incursions in the Gulf, and certainly the occupation of Iraq by the United States was at least by several authors, called cyber warfare because of their use of intelligence and cell phone data. So we've already passed that demarcation. All future wars will be cyber wars in part.
Right, right. Now, this is your last question, Richard. You have given so much of your valuable time, and I really appreciate that. I'm sure our viewers and listeners all across nations, they're going to benefit from what you shared and your input and your suggestions. Now, this is the last point that you have written so many books on cyber warfare and all. So, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, would you mind sharing details about your books, where they can go to buy that, and what do you think, which books they would, they must read so that they can understand the cyber warfare better?
Sure, sure. So the first book I wrote on cyber warfare was this one. It's called Surviving Cyberwar, and it's a really a history of nation state attacks. So and it's used mostly as a textbook. You can get it on Amazon. I apologize for the ridiculous price that the academic publisher charges for it. It really, since it only goes up to the Google Aurora attacks of 2010, it could be out of date, but it's still a good foundational cyber warfare history book. There Will Be Cyber War is my book, also available on Amazon. I have published this myself, so it's very affordable. I think the price just dropped to $13 on Amazon. And this is a result of my going back to school, studying warfare at the War Studies Department at King's College London. And it's also a history of the revolution of military affairs and how we got to today's state. And then, follow me on Twitter and you'll see all my future publications as well. My Twitter handle is Cyberwar, one word. So I'm easy to find.
Great, Cyberwar. That's your Twitter handle. Wonderful. So, thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate you joining me on Risk Roundup and discussing this very critical risk facing each and every one of us. So, thank you so much for that. And I hope that as you write more books or as we come up with more research about cyber warfare and other areas, that you will be willing to come on Risk Roundup again and have a dialogue so that it will benefit everyone across nations.
Of course, happy to, Jayshree. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Wonderful. So the challenges and complexities of evolving threats and security has crossed the barriers of space, ideology, and politics, demanding a constructive, collaborative effort of all stakeholders across nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia. When the changing nature of threats are bringing new sets of challenges and complexities, collective brainstorming is a necessity and not an option like what we are doing right now, that we have to have a dialogue so that we can have an objective evaluation of what is a threat and how can that be secure. It needs to be understood that cybersecurity vulnerabilities do not arise only from technology, but also from inadequacies in governance, processes, management, culture, interdependencies, and integration. When each nation, its government, industries, organizations, academia, and individuals are now vulnerable to cyber attacks, it is important to understand that short-term fixes that are preferred over identifying and fixing root causes of the problems generally do not work. The approach to security is currently reactive. Not only governments, but most of the industries and organizations do not give importance to securing their information data and are reactive in the response, and this reactive response approach limits entire nation's ability to have a proactive cybersecurity risk management capability. While the debate on the structure and role of government, industries, organizations, and academia will continue in the coming years, any attempt to define cyber warfare needs to begin with identifying, understanding, incorporating, and broadening the definition and nature of threat in cyberspace, geospace, and space. Cybersecurity requires an integrated approach with a common language, while appropriate hardware and software is a fundamental necessity. Establishing effective cybersecurity framework, integrated NGIOA approach, structured processes is even more important. And that is the reason Risk Group Cybersecurity Risk Research Center and Strategic Security Risk Research Center are created to identify, evaluate, and manage the risk-facing NGIOA in CGS. We at Risk Group firmly believe that risk management, security, and peace walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict, and it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we've built for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security. So if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the risk roundups, to watch the risk roundup videos, or to hear the risk roundup podcast, go to riskgroupllc.com, and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayshree Pandya, your host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.